great to be back. It's my first in-person conference in the last 18 months. Coincidentally, the last one was also done here in San Diego with the Ocean Sciences meeting. So I think for all of us, there have been a lot of changes and challenges in the last 18 months, both on the one hand for the manufacturers to keep producing instrumentation with all the supply chain limitations that we encountered and challenges there, but also for the researchers who are trying to kind of keep their research going, keep the monitoring going, for agencies to kind of get to the data. And maybe one realization or learning I've had over the last year as I was thinking about what would be a good topic to talk about today is really the importance of having access to data while you not be maybe physically able to get to your instrumentation, to retrieve it, or to go on a research cruise because you don't have access to facilities or ships that have been canceled cruises and things like that. So I think I want to use that time today to talk a little bit about the importance of real-time monitoring of water quality. And maybe logistically, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. I think we have a little room in terms of time. So I think the best way to really illustrate how valuable real-time monitoring is to use some examples from the real world. In this case, I'm going to talk about two case studies. One is kind of related to state of emergency that was declared in Tampa Bay earlier this year, and is the result of industrial wastewater discharge into Tampa Bay. And the second part is going to be a case study on monitoring the heat wave in the Puget Sound. For people who know Seattle, Seabird is located in Seattle and the second facility in Oregon, so we are definitely affected by that. And then I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about what kind of solutions Seabird offers to do this kind of real-time monitoring. One disclaimer right off the bat, I will really focus my effort in the second part on most of the CTDs in the hope that I can entice you to come to our booth, which is at 903, to kind of learn a little bit more about the optical instrumentation and other instruments that we offer there. So the first case study was really related to a wastewater plant breach at Piney Point. There was an emergency declared by the governor of Florida on April 3rd. Piney Point is the little red dot on the map. You can see that right there. It's kind of the site of a former phosphate processing plant in a really large swath of land. And that's in the northern Manatee County, just near the coastline of the lower Tampa Bay. That plant was built in the mid-60s and was operational in 2001. And now the only thing really left over there is phosphogypsum stacks that are slowly aging with millions of gallons of wastewater on top of them. Something that I didn't know until recently, phosphogypsum is actually a byproduct of the phosphate mining process that is both harmful to the environment and to humans. Over the years, there have been accidental discharges of that wastewater into the bay, and typically they have resulted in algal blooms that kind of followed these events. So this year, at the end of March 30th, there was a discharge of over 215 million gallons of wastewater into the bay. And that carried an amount of over 200 tons of nitrogen into this area. Just to give you an idea of how much that is, if you think about those 200 tons of nitrogen, that's typically what that whole area, the bays, the back bays, the waterways, the preserves, would generally see over the course of 1 year. So that was really concentrated just in a period of 10 days. So you can see there was significant concern about the kind of nutrient loading that would occur and potentially accelerate harmful algal blooms. So luckily, one of our Seabird customers, Dr. Jim Yates at USGS down in Florida, and her team had instruments right offshore. And we're the only ones to really get all the real-time data of the event as it was unfolding. And in addition, that data is actually publicly accessible at the time, so it wasn't just limited to researchers. Anybody could kind of see the events unfolding there. The instrument included an equal power, it's a scientific instrument, and a CFOX, just at that area where the circle is indicated there. So typically, Kim and her team kind of collect data in partnership with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, which I will come back to in a minute here. During kind of non-state emergency times, her team specializes more on integrated studies around changes in the coastal ecosystem processes and how they impact or mitigate risks of coastal hazards. In this case, they were really kind of focusing on the emergency discharge, which included a mix of kind of industrial wastewater and seawater, with the main pollutants being nitrogen and phosphorus. And you can see that the elevation of the levels of the nitrogen and phosphorus proceeded weeks after even the discharge stopped. So what you can see in the plot on the left is really the fluorescence concentrations that came as a result of algal blooms happening following the discharge. On the left, you see what was happening during the actual discharge. You can see the extent of those blooms. And then even after the discharge, you can see a residual concentration of fluorescence in that area. So the Tampa Bay Estuary Program kind of, as I mentioned earlier, kind of coordinated really an environmental monitoring response to this event that included many regional partners, like the University of South Florida, and what they did, you can see in the plot there, they really modeled the trajectory of the plume of the algal, of the fluorescence, and it's really quite impressive the amount of data that was analyzed and the number of agencies involved. If you look at that, there was 12 different agencies that were monitoring 17 different parameters over 380 different sites. So it was quite an effort to kind of understand how Tampa Bay kind of responded to this event. So the idea was really to understand, looking at the data prior, during, and after the discharge, to really see what the ecosystem, how it responded to that event. Since then, really no accidental discharges has happened. There were some occurrences of red tide that are not typical for this time of year in Tampa Bay, so currently there's analysis ongoing to see if there's a linkage between the discharge and the occurrence of the red tide. And from my perspective, it was really great to see the coordination of so many different agencies across county, state, federal, university, nonprofit, and even private contractors kind of working together to understand what's going on and to kind of devise methods and strategies in terms of how to protect the health of Tampa Bay in the future. So one thing that I kind of wanted to highlight, while it's not really clear to what extent the real-time data kind of guided the decision-making in terms of declaring a state of emergency, it certainly aided us, because you can base your decisions on real data that wouldn't have been available otherwise if you're just monitoring and having to retrieve your instrumentation at a later point. So I think this really kind of shows the value of having this real-time data available at the time. The second event is really much closer to home for me in terms of the Pacific Northwest, and it was related to a heat wave we had just recently at the end of June over a 3-day period, where we had record-breaking temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and whoever was visiting Seattle at the time may have thought it was San Diego, but it actually wasn't. So it's quite remarkable for Seattle to have that kind of high temperatures over such an extended period of time. You can see in the plot on the map of the left side, the extent of that heat wave went all the way from British Columbia down to Oregon and extended eastward even to Puget Sound. Normally, if you have kind of atmospheric variability in that area, the kind of cold waters of the Northwest really kind of buffer the sea life against that kind of variability. In this case, we had kind of a perfect storm brewing in the sense that in combination with the heat wave, we also had extremely low tides around noon, which kind of exposed the sea life to extreme heat and sun. And you can see in the picture on the right how that literally cooked the shellfish alive during that time. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at the news reports. There were several articles showing infrared pictures of the kind of low tide estuaries with temperatures in the 45-degree range of the shellfish. It's quite impressive, actually. If you think about the extent of the damage that was caused by this event, it was estimated that over 1 billion sea creatures have died in that. So this is really dramatic. And there's a few just Google that. There's great articles on what actually happened here and what people were doing trying to mitigate the situation. So one thing I should say is that the effect wasn't really the same everywhere. Even if you take very closely related measurement sites, and here's two orca buoys shown that are part of the NUS, which is the Northwest Association of Network Ocean Observing Systems, a lot of tongue twister for me, which is part of the larger IUS, which is the Integrated Ocean Observing System. It showed basically two time series from orca buoys. The one on the upper left is at Pittsburgh, and you can see that there was extreme heating during that time, with temperatures exceeding 6 degrees Celsius over normal. But it was within the variability that you normally would encounter in that area. And just across the bay, really, down at Toronto, you can see another orca buoy where there was the same kind of amount of heating, but it was really exceeding that natural variability. So even though you had these very closely located measurement spots, the effect of the heat wave was quite different. So there's a lot of research going on in terms of what actually caused that variability with regard to the geography and the proximity that how they play into this. Maybe one thing I would like to say on these orca buoys, they were basically doing profiling twice a day with a surface mounted winch, using Seabird 90 plus equipment to get the data that you see here. So all these changes really were monitored by an extensive operational network that's available in the Washington State coastal waters that's operated by multiple partners. So you have buoys, you have research ships, you have land stations, you have underway measurements from ferries, you even have seaplane measurements. And if you look at the lower left-hand corner, they even show a glider CTD that was active during that time. You can see that a lot of those measurement stations are equipped with Seabird equipment that provides the data necessary to do the analysis here. So most of the data are really used to kind of to understand the short-term options for mitigation and the long-term effects of this heat wave. In the short term, it really allowed the agriculture farmers to take preventive measures, either in terms of harvesting these shellfish early before they would get cooked, and then or find some way to cover it or to reduce the effect of the heat. And so it was really valuable in that regard. In the long term, it's really what people are trying to understand is the effect on the marine life as it's recovering from the stress of the heat wave. So that's something that's really ongoing, and I believe the data from this observation network will help the coastal stakeholders to help manage their assets and keep future sound healthy. So I think these kind of examples show the value of having real-time data available. On the one hand, in terms of guiding our decision making, or shortening the time frame it takes to understand actually what's happening. And on the other hand, to even in some cases put preventive measures in place that actually protect the habitat and the ecosystem. Let's switch gears a little bit and see what Seabird typically offers in terms of enabling you to get this kind of real-time data. And I'm going to focus here mostly on the CTDs. We have a ton of optical instrumentation as well, and I hope you take the advantage of my office to come to the booth and talk about that later. But just to kind of what you see here is kind of an overview of the instrumentation that is able to produce these kind of real-time measurements. And it's kind of ordered in a historic fashion. So we have the 16 plus V2 on the left side. It's probably the oldest instrument. It's been active since probably the late 80s. So it's really field-proven technology. And it had a sibling that we just saw data from the Orca buoys, which is the 19 plus, which is an identical instrument that is able to profile. Then a little bit in the mid-2000s, the microcat was developed. That's probably the instrument that is most commonly used all the way from shallow deployments to full ocean depth. If you don't need a lot of additional measurements or want to deploy it in more mobile settings like on ROVs or nets and things like that, you just need temperature information. We typically have the option to use the 39, SB39. And I should actually say 39 plus. Our newest instrument that was released in 2015 is the hydrokinetic B, and that really allows you to do much more comprehensive multi-parameter measurements. It includes conductivity, temperature, pressure, dissolved oxygen, pH, and chlorophyll fluorescence activity. So that's really probably the most integrated of all these instruments. And all of these can really combine, with maybe with the exception of the hydrokinetic B. You can connect them to inductive modems, which then allow you in a mooring setting to actually get data to the surface and observe that real time. So let's go a little bit through the individual instruments. So the 16 plus V2 is probably our oldest instrument, probably most field-proven in existence or in use since 1987. And I've actually used them on several cruises while I was at Scripps doing research. That's kind of saved my bacon occasionally in terms of getting calibrations done in a sync at a ship. But it's really comprised of integrated temperature, conductivity, and pressure measurements that can be paired with auxiliary instrumentation, whether that's current readers or biogeochemical sensors. So there's ports to kind of get that data in. You typically have the option to do sampling between 10 seconds or 4 hours. Gives you flexible pumping times and having a serial port or inductive modem communication capability. Then on the hydrocat, on the microcat side, that's really probably our most popular instrument. Over 10,000 of these have been deployed globally probably in the last 15 years. Again, you have integrated temperature, conductivity, and pressure. You have the ability to do shallow deployments with a plastic housing or full ocean depth via titanium housing. It can be integrated with optional optical dissolved oxygen sensors and be paired either with an inductive modem or direct serial communication to a surface control buoy. We also have the ability to kind of pair it with a pH sensor, and this is one that uses solid-state technology, which is incredibly stable over time. We've had that in our portfolio probably for at least 5 or 6 years now in the newest version, and used within the Argo program. These sensors are much more accurate than glass bulb technology. They don't rely on really reagent cartridges, and show really very low drift in seawater. So in terms of kind of, quite frankly, have really outperformed any kind of glass bulb technology over the last years. The 39 plus is really just offering you the ability to measure temperature in the varying time responses. If you have really a fast one, that's about 0.5 seconds external temperature time constant there. Or on the right, you can see it with a version that has a 5-second time constant. It's much more robust in that manner. It also has the option to integrate a pressure sensor. The ideal application for these are really fixed site deployments but you can also deploy it on nets, towed vehicles, or ROVs. It's just more if you don't have the need for conductivity or other biogeochemical sensors. This is really the ideal instrument to deploy. One thing I wanted to introduce you to is that may not be you may not be as familiar with it is the hydrokinetic. Excuse me, was that a question? No? So this is the hydrokinetic key that really combines all these different measurements from conductivity to turbidity into a single instrument. It is really cost effective in that it doesn't require in-field calibrations, and it's protected by anti-fouling technology that enables long-term deployment of the sensor of the instrument. It has a swappable pH sensor that allows it to do a very quick field service turnaround times, and by not having to service it on a really frequent basis, you really become very cost effective. I think one key component here is the anti-fouling. It includes some EPA-approved anti-fouling device that's integrated into the internal flow path of the cell that helps both protect from the biofouling, but also helps with preventing sediment accumulation in the measurement volume. The optics is protected by a copper faceplate and also includes a biogrinder that helps keep that plate with the extended deployment time. Same as the hydrokinetic key, as the microcap, this technology is really derived from the microcap technology. It has the same accuracy and drift rates, includes the very stable electronics, and is calibrated in the same methodology as the microcap. I think one thing I wanted to mention, it also is paired with a software that allows you to really collect the data from all instruments in a very consistent manner, from all these different measurements. And that's something that may be challenging if you integrate third-party sensors. You have software that integrates with your instrumentation, and you have to find ways how to integrate the data from other instrument manufacturers. So this allows you really kind of a turnkey solution and analysis package for very kind of a broad application with biogeochemical sensors. I do want to spend a little bit of time just kind of talking about biofouling, because I think the data is only as good as you keep your sensors clean. And here's an example of the hydrocap before deployment on the left side. And just within a month, you can see how quickly instruments actually foul in the ocean. And then you can see how extensive that kind of growth gets within just a few months of deployment. The thing really I wanted to point out is how localized the effect of the anti-fouling device is. So you can see it really keeps the intakes of the flow path clean. It doesn't really affect anything else in the vicinity. The really exciting news for us is that we have actually just come out, or are in the process of coming out with a new version of the hydrocap EP. It's called V2. And sometimes it's important to talk about the changes that have been implemented, but I think it's also sometimes just as important to understand what hasn't changed. So the accuracy is just the same as the original hydrocap. It is comparable with the current deployment infrastructure. There is no dimensional changes to the instrument, and it also allows you to upgrade on a real kind of time scale, and you can preserve serial numbers in the process of upgrading that. That's sometimes really important for international customers. The main improvements here were really around preventing saltwater corrosion on the pH nodule. That was really one of the weak spots. So it includes a new crushing kit and really secure mounting of that pH module on the instrument. It also protects it against flooding. I think I'm almost out of time here, so if you have questions, please ask them now or come to the booth. I'm available to have more extended conversations there. Thank you.